Well, hi, my name is Charlie, and welcome to Explore. Um, I think this might be my first live chat. And so before we begin, I just want to thank my staff for putting it together, all the fans for tuning in, and what kind of drew me out of what we might call pre-hibernation, since we're talking about bears today, was our special guest, our Explore resident, our nature specialist, and former Katmai Ranger, Mike Fitz. It's such an honor to have you on explore.org. Always, I know that myself and all the fans are always humbled by your selfless nature. So thank you so much.
Hey, I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
It's so this is to people watching this today. This is the first time I've done this. So all notes are welcome. Explore's mantra has always been never stop learning. So if we like this, maybe this is something we'll continue. My staff has made it so easy that they said it's time, Charlie, to try this. Mike, I'm a huge bear fan, and having you explain things is such a special thing. What made this bear season so unique to you? What was so special about it?
I this year there were many things. It's kind of hard to choose, honestly. But this year, with the exceptional amount of salmon that returned to Brooks River, I think that really changed the dynamic on the river. Normally bears, especially early in the summer, they're clustered up at Brooks Falls because that's the best place to fish in early summer. But there were so many fish this year moving through Brooks River that bears found success not only at Brooks Falls, but elsewhere along the river, really from the falls all the way downstream to the river mouth. So we saw bears that were not only very well fed, but we also saw bears that were extremely tolerant of one another in comparison to other years. I mean, we definitely still saw competition for some fishing spots and competition for mating opportunities, for instance. So it wasn't all, just the bears out there holding hands, but the overall tolerance that the bears displayed towards one another was, I think, this year quite exceptional. And that's probably because they were just so well fed this year.
Yeah, I was, for me, myself, too, I thought this was a really unique bear season. I mean, the season began with wolves at Brooks Falls, in abundance, which I've never seen. I've never seen so much interaction. There almost seemed to be mommy daycare groups going every day. Bears were getting along. I was just curious, do you think that with the less impact also of humans and perhaps through COVID, did that affect the bears and their behavior? Do you think they might have been less stressed, or is it more related to the salmon population?
It's difficult to say with certainty. I think the salmon probably were the biggest influence on the way we saw bears behave this summer, but certainly the relative lack of people at Brooks River, I think, opened up opportunities for bears to use the river in different ways than they would if this were a more typical year with higher levels of visitation at Brooks River, maybe more people stepping into the river. Because you can classify bears, as adult males and adult females, and young bears like subadults and cubs. But you can also classify bears based on their tolerance for humans overall, whether they're highly habituated to humans, like Holly is, for instance. She's very tolerant to the presence of people and the noise we make, or if they're not as habituated to the presence of people. And we see some bears, like right now, coming down to the river because maybe there's very few people in the area and they only use the river in the fall months. But in early summer, we saw some of the bears that maybe don't show a really high tolerance for people away from the falls, using the lower half of Brooks River, scavenging for salmon down there. Some of the adult males were drawn down there when they were courting single females, but sometimes they were just down there because they could make a living. So I definitely think, having fewer people at the river did change the dynamic on how the bears used the place.
Mike, I've heard and I've watched nature videos, and they describe brown bears as almost like solitary animals. But when I see how social they are at Brooks Falls, and then the idea that they go home and hibernate for winter, would that actually mean that they're extremely social animals because they don't have that much time to be alone? I mean, they wake up from a winter slumber when spring comes. Somehow their GPS leads them back to Brooks Falls. where we see them all interacting. So are they more social than we give them credit for?
I think they are more social, and that's than we give them credit for. And that's one of the things that the bear camps have, and watching bears at Brooks River in person, have really taught me is that yeah, the bears have many adaptations uh, and uh, and ways to communicate with one another that help them to navigate more of a social environment that we have at Brooks River. We also have to consider that Brooks River it's fairly unique in the sense that bears gather there throughout the entire summer to feed, and there's very few places on Earth where maybe that happens. So most habitats, bears are competing for food resources that are more dispersed. The habitats don't have as much food available to bears. So bears have to work a lot harder for their food. They have to compete a lot harder for the food, and I think that restricts, their social nature. When bears have access to a place like Brooks River, which this summer gave them basically access to unlimited amounts of food, they're sort of released, I think, from some of those behavioral constraints that they face in other ecosystems, like they might in Denali National Park, or on the North Slope of Alaska, or even like in Yellowstone or the Rocky Mountains, where they're working a lot harder for food and they live at lower densities. It's just a lot harder for bears to make a living in those habitats. And when they do come into contact with one another, it's often because they need to compete for food. But the sheer amount of salmon that we saw at Brooks River this year really opened up all of those social opportunities for bears. And we even see bears palling around with one another. Certain bears seem to prefer the company of other bears on the river. And I think that's something pretty unique that we can observe on the bear camps.
Yeah. I don't know. Bears, I'm looking at this clip and bears just make me happy. There's something about them. I can't explain it. How did you even get drawn to bears yourself? Was it a fluke? How does one become a park ranger at Katmai? Was it just by choice, or what is your connection to bears?
It was a bit of a fluke. To make a long story short, I I had actually a summer job at Acadia National Park on the coast of Maine, and I was planning on going back there. But my girlfriend, who I'm now married to, she got a job up in Alaska, and we had always kind of wanted to go there. And she said, "You know what? Hey, why don't you? Well, let's see if we can get you a job there too." And they couldn't get me a paid job that year, but luckily, I said, "Hey, you know what? If I can volunteer there, but you're gonna have to buy all the food so I can eat this summer." So I went up there and I volunteered as a volunteer ranger, and then I just really fell in love with the bears. We had been working in many different national parks up until that point in time. Katmai, I think, was maybe my seventh national park, or sixth or seventh national park that I had worked at. But Katmai really opened up my eyes to what a wild landscape, looks like. I was not, a rookie when it came to wild landscapes, but I had never seen really a place like Katmai. And then to be able to watch the bears, watching bears at Brooks Falls is an iconic scene in nature, and it's an iconic scene in U.S. national parks. And to be able to watch those bears, I quickly fell in love with them, and wanted to know just really everything about them as individuals too. One of the really cool things about Brooks River, when we look at 747 here, is that we get to see these bears not only as wild animals, but they're not anonymous. They are individuals that we can get to know by watching them on the webcams. And that really opened my eyes to that opportunity as well. And now everywhere that I when I'm outside in my backyard here, or if I'm bird watching, I really do try to pay attention not to just the species that are around me, but what those individual animals are doing, because they are sentient organisms in a lot of ways. And that's one thing that Brooks River and the bears happen to teach me as well.
Mike, 747 finally won. He is the Fat Bear champ. I've been calling him the hunk all season. How happy are you that 747 finally got his due? Look at that specimen. He came first day already, Fat Bear champ. Look at him.
Yeah, that's an early summer clip there, I think, from him. So he's a tank. I've been in 747's corner for a long time. And Bear Camp fans know that I've been lobbying for 747 to win Fat Bear Week for several years, and I'm glad he finally got the recognition that he deserves. There's plenty of competition out there, I mean, even in Fat Bear Week this year, he faced some pretty tubby bears overall. So it'll be interesting to see if he can defend his title next year. He's a big bear. I think he's well positioned for success next year. Those fat reserves are not only going to serve him well when he goes into the den this winter, but they're also going to power his and fuel his migration to the river next spring, and perhaps his pursuit of females during the mating season, which happens in late spring as well, when there's not a lot of food available to bears in the Katmai landscape. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how big 747 is next year. But yeah, I'm very, very pleased that he finally was crowned Fat Bear Week champ.
747 is so big, the tank, as you call him, I just call him the hunk. I even wonder if he hibernates. He might just go under the bridge and go to sleep. That bear is insulated from any winter storm. I mean, he's massive. Incredible.
Yeah, he is the biggest bear that I've ever seen. And last year he was estimated to weigh about 1,400 pounds. And there's no reason to believe that he's smaller this year. So one of the largest brown bears, truly one of the largest brown bears on Earth, we get to see on the bear camps. And I think that's really a special thing.
And, to all the bear fans, we know there's a huge loyalty to Otis and Holly, and that's why we respect our elders. And we created the first annual Otis Fund to help preserve Katmai. And to all the fans last year, to show you the growth of the bear cam, I know Katmai did a fundraiser and it raised $15,000. And this year, the Otis Fund is closing in on $90,000 in only 1 week. So a tribute to first all the fans. Thank you so much for your support. But, what I'm getting at is all the bears we love, and, with Mick Otis, and maybe we'll have to create a Holly Fund as well, because we know how much we love her. But it must be amazing to see the growth of Fat Bear Week, an idea that you created, Mike. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I'm extremely pleased with how many people enjoy Fat Bear Week. It's really grown beyond sort of any expectations that I had for it when we first started it. When I was a ranger at Katmai, I always knew that bears were charismatic animals and people connected with them very strongly on an intellectual and emotional level when they came to visit Brooks River. And then when Explore.org installed the webcams at Katmai, and I got the opportunity to work with the webcam audience, I found that people were making very strong connections to the bears through the webcams. And Fat Bear Week was, just a way to try to share a little bit more in a fun way, a little bit more information about how bears survive, why they get fat to survive, what fat means to their life, and what salmon mean to the bears at Brooks River and throughout the Bristol Bay region overall. And it's also like a really positive story as well. And when you go online, I mean, it's really easy to go into your social media feed and just be doom scrolling. I mean, you're looking at the, your Twitter feed, and you're like, oh no, what sort of disaster happened today that, I want to worry about. But Fat Bear Week really is a celebration of such a healthy and robust ecosystem that we have in Katmai. And I think people, need those stories just as much as we need to pay attention to, the other things that are going on in our world.
Yeah. This year, it's believed that almost 500,000 people voted for their favorite bear on Fat Bear Week, which is really a remarkable accomplishment. I think that's why I love Katmai so much. I've always said with the live cams, Katmai is a pearl of the planet. It's one of the few places where nature is actually working. I mean, you have salmon, 24 hours light, the birds, wolves, bears, a functioning ecosystem. And, we're so indebted to the selfless work of yourself and the fish and game. Do you have any concerns, any threats, like anything that makes you nervous tonight about the future of the Katmai ecosystem? Anything we should be aware of? Because it was such a successful year this year.
Yeah, the success of Katmai certainly isn't guaranteed. I mean, it's a conservation success story, but we need to ensure that we're good stewards of that landscape in the Bristol Bay region, the North Pacific Ocean overall, because the phenomenon that we enjoy at Brooks River with the bears is dependent on its salmon. And bears are pretty well positioned to survive changes brought to the environment by climate change as a species overall. Because they're generalist omnivores, they can take advantage of a lot of different food resources. So if one food resource sort of peters out, then they may be, able to make a living on another food source, for example. But climate change is a worry for me, especially in regards to how it can impact salmon. The Bristol Bay salmon runs over the last 30, 40 years have been doing extremely well. It remains the last great salmon run on Earth. And this is just a typical scene from Upper Brooks River. This is right at the head of Brooks River, some footage that I took a couple of years ago. So, it shows what an ecosystem is like at its fully functioning potential. But climate change could potentially disrupt freshwater habitats. It could disrupt easily the ocean habitats as well. This graph right here is the water temperatures in Brooks River in July of 2019 when the area experienced an unprecedented heat wave. And you can see in early July, some of the high temperatures at the head of Brooks River, right at the outlet of Lake Brooks, reached into the upper 70s, which is, kind of like lethal temperatures for salmon. Luckily, the habitat for salmon in Katmai is very diverse. So it allowed the fish to find refuge in the lakes. They could hang out in the lakes where the water was colder, down below that thermocline area, that hotter water at the surface, and just kind of wait for things to cool down before they continued their migration. But salmon in a lot of other places don't have that option. But that sort of experience that we saw last year, it could become the normal in the future. So it's concerning for me that climate change could disrupt their freshwater habitats and the oceans as well. The productivity of the North Pacific seems to be really good for salmon, or for sockeye salmon in Bristol Bay right now, but that's not the case with other salmon stocks throughout North America. So we have to ensure that we're tackling climate change. I mean, that's one of the big things that occasionally keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about the future of Katmai's berries and fish.
I've always wondered. I watch the bear cam every day, and I'm kind of emotional that the season's coming to an end, actually. And how do the bears know it's just time to pack up and go home? I mean, there's something internal, and do they say goodbye to each other and say, see you next season? I mean, what happens? I mean, how does a bear who's been eating all of a sudden say to its, offspring or to the other bears, let's go. We have a long walk home. I mean, how do they know?
I'm not sure we're ever going to fully know the answers to like what triggers bears to enter hibernation. But they've been working up to that moment for their whole summer. I mean, that's the whole point of what they're doing during the summer outside the mating season, is just to prepare for hibernation. So when they're going into hibernation, they don't eat, they don't drink, they don't urinate, they don't defecate. So they need really those massive proportions of body fat on them to sustain them through wintertime. Right around this time of the year, depending on the bear, they're going to start to experience a lowered metabolism. Their heart rate and breathing rate is going to start to decline very slowly. It actually starts that transition into their hibernation physiology actually starts several weeks before they go into their dens. And some bears at Brooks River and in Katmai could be experiencing that now. Some of the bears going into their dens earlier than some of the later denning bears. And I think that's maybe controlled, from what I've read, by the expression of different genes. Bears seem to have genes that switch on and off that are specific to hibernation time, and they're not active in the summer, for instance. Different hormone levels can be triggered by a lack of daylight, for instance. So there's these not only daily rhythms that they go through like we do when we get tired at night, but a longer year-round rhythm that they are adapted to and have an instinct to follow. And then there's also like maybe protein receptors that are controlled by different genes that help to maybe detect molecules and regulate certain cellular responses. Their hibernation physiology is fascinating, and biologists and physiologists and even medical professionals are actively researching this, because a lot of the stuff that bears do in hibernation, humans can't do. We can't maintain our muscle mass and our bone mass without exercise. Bears do that in the den. So if we can figure out kind of how they do that, it might help to, help people in the future.
You know, it's funny you bring that up. Hibernation's always fascinated me, and you've heard a lot about travel to Mars and outer space. And one of the rumors that floats around out there is that the key to space travel is to uncode how bears hibernate, because a bear can slow its breathing, its metabolism. So, is there any truth to that? Because I've actually heard that space travel is almost dependent on understanding the hibernation of bears, because they can just completely shut it down and yet function.
Yeah, I think there definitely is some truth to that. I mean, when you look at science fiction movies, look back to the original Planet of the Apes movie. The astronauts or space. I don't know if they were astronauts in the Planet of the Apes. I can't remember if they were just from the United States or not. But they were in hibernation for a period of time, and then they woke up. There was a more recent movie that came out several years ago, Interstellar, I think, and that movie had a portion where people went into a hibernation phase, and that since we can't travel at the speed of light, for instance, we have to maybe have a way to prolong the human lifespan as we're traveling to these far-flung locations. For instance, you could think about the challenges of bringing, on a trip to Mars, for instance. Getting there might take 2 years or something like that, or a year. So how do you carry that much food along with you? But if you went into hibernation and you were able to maintain your health while you were hibernating, you wouldn't necessarily need to bring as much food with you. And then even for astronauts that are in the International Space Station, they have to exercise vigorously to maintain their health while they're in space, because gravity helps us a lot. Just that force that's on our bones and our muscles helps us to keep us healthy. But in space, the microgravity just isn't enough to maintain muscle mass and bone health. So even with heavy exercise, with a lot of exercise, people who spend a lot of time in space still can lose muscle mass. They can still lose bone mass. So if we can figure out how bears are doing this, then maybe that can help people to stay healthier in space.
Yeah, it's something I've always been fascinated with. So as season wind down, I mean, do you yourself, as a park ranger and a bear lover, do you get emotionally attached? Will you miss them? I mean, is there a connection for you as well?
There is. I do miss the bears, and sometimes in the depth of winter, I find myself thinking, "What are the bears doing right now?" And I know that they're tucked into their dens comfortably. In the end of January, early February, I think about all of those baby bears that are being born. That's all bears have about the same birthday in North America for black and brown bears, at least. Polar bears are born a little bit earlier than the other two species. But yeah, I think about what they're doing in the midwinter. I think about those tiny cubs that are just beginning their life, and what experiences they'll have inside the den and when they come out of the den as well. It's tough to see the bears go. I mean, we watch them all summer, day in and day out on the cameras. We get to know them as individuals, and you always, there's always that bit of uncertainty. Like, are the bears that I enjoy watching, going to come back in the same way? What challenges will they face in the future? So I do think about those things for sure.
Yeah, they're truly special. And you brought up one other thing about hibernation, which has always fascinated me, which is that birth actually takes place. So the female bear gives birth in a state of hibernation is just truly remarkable. I mean,
Yeah, they're
that's
the only mammals that can do this. They're the only mammals that lactate while they're hibernating. It is really incredible. I mean, what female bears undergo to reproduce. I mean, they need a high body fat percentage before they go into the den to even give birth, and then they need to sustain the growth of their cubs after they give birth for several months before they come out of the den and can start to find food again. Yeah, so it is just really a remarkable process, and another reason to be even more impressed with their physiology and their ability to survive.
You said that 747 will have some competition next season. Did you spot any, yearlings or anything you thought were the up and runners? Something that, the future champs, you got any you want to call out right now?
There are, well, as far as adult males go, for several years I've said I think the webcam audience really needs to watch number 503. He's a bear with a very unique story. He was separated as a from his mother as a yearling cub, but then he was adopted by Holly. So he had another couple of summers of education with the mother bear at the river. Here's Holly. Um, so I think that set him up really well for success. And he's just grown a lot over the last several years. And keep in mind, he was only born, I think, in 2013, I believe. Yeah. So I mean, he still has a lot of growing to do. Bears and Katmai, for the adult males, they typically don't reach their full size until their early teens. So he still has a lot of growing to do, and I think he could become a very dominant bear at Brooks River, and one that could become just as fat as 747, depending on how good he is at fishing and how well he can compete for those fishing spots. Other bears like a very young adult male, number 812, very pudgy, very successful at the falls. So good looking bear, very playful bear right now. It'll be interesting to see how these young bears like 503 and 812 transition out of maybe some of their playfulness as they prioritize other things as they grow into adults, or whether or not they're going to keep some of their playful habits in the future. And then even like a smaller bear that's probably full grown right now, but that doesn't mean he can't become a more dominant bear. And that's number 151 Walker. He was a tough competitor in this year's Fat Bear Week, very pudgy overall. And we've seen him show increasing signs of dominance as he's grown into a fully mature adult. So I think those are definitely some bears to watch going forward.
I would love to know from the fans at some point. I almost feel like we could expand the categories of Fat Bear Week, because just championing one when they're all champs is almost impossible. So at a future date, people who might be listening, I'd love to get your notes. And another thing you brought up, which has always amazed me, a huge shout out to the female bears, Holly, Grazier, and all of them. These big male bears are so tough and they're big. But what's always amazed me is that the mom bears hunting at Brooks with three cubs, knowing that those cubs can be in danger, protecting the cubs and hunting. I mean, we've all saw it with Grazer this season. I mean, they are just truly the toughest, biggest, baddest bears of them all. And huge shout out. And it just amazes me. They don't get sometimes, well, we love, the credit, but I've always been amazed at how strong and courageous they are.
Absolutely. Mother bears face a lot of challenges to rear their offspring, to protect their offspring, to make sure that they're well nourished. And they're often, the skinniest of the adults that we see at Brooks River, just because they have to devote so much energy to ensuring that their cubs are well fed and protected. And that takes time away from feeding themselves, for instance. They have to devote a tremendous amount of energy into producing milk for their cubs, especially their young cubs. They have to remain vigilant and watch for threats frequently. That takes time away from foraging opportunities. And when you look at a bear like 747, for instance, for all his success, he doesn't have to worry about that sort of thing. But he just focuses on himself. He's a bachelor along the river, doing what he wants, going where he wants. And mother bears don't have that luxury. They really do have to work quite hard to make a living and make sure that their cubs are well protected.
Mike, I could talk to you all day. I'm sure people have better things to do than hear me go on and on. But when I started exploring the live cam network, the nickname was Pearls of the Planet, and kind of my dream was just to help people fall in love with the world, because I find you take better care of what you care for if you develop that emotional connection. And then the second part was to really champion the selfless acts of others. And to me, you're truly a selfless hero. People like you, and in all our live cams and films we made, people who've given up, the almighty dollar to try to improve the human condition. the environment we live in. And, I'm just humbled by your selflessness. And I just wanted to thank you as I prepare for my own hibernation season. Um, if you have any last thoughts about the season or any questions for the big bear, Charlie, right here. I might have to compete for 747. I've been eating quite a bit. I might put myself a fat bear champ next year. I'm here for you. So all the fans know that an audience, everyone who works at Explore and these selfless people, we're just stewards for you, trying to create a pure habitat where you can connect to the natural world and meet great minds like Mike Fitz. It's really an honor to hear you speak. I don't know if you have any questions for me, and if not, we can close it up and just thank everyone and the Katmai Conservancy. I'll bring them up. We're going to keep that fund open all the way up to $100,000, but no pressure on that. We've far exceeded our expectations. It's just we love the bear so much and the work you guys do.
Yeah, it's great to speak with you, Charlie, and thanks so much for the kind words. I mean, it's important to me that that I can share my love and knowledge of Katmai National Park with other people. So it's been a very meaningful part of my life, the bear cams, and being able to talk to people around the world, and also the webcam audience, they challenge me in a lot of different ways because they often ask me questions and answers that I don't know the answer to. And I try to find that answer out for them as best I can. Sometimes we don't have an answer for a lot of those questions, but it's a rewarding, vocation for me. And I'm glad to be part of this community overall. I did have one question for you, Charlie. And that actually comes from a webcam viewer. They sent this question in advance through our Bearcam question form. So I was looking in there the other day and I saw that somebody asked a question for you. And they want to know, Texan Rhonda asked, what is your dream for the future of the cams? What would you love to be able to do, but maybe you can't right now?
Oh, I've been asked that for a lot of years. And as you become a more elder bear, you kind of change your perspective. But the dream is always going to be the same, and that is to connect people to the natural world in the purest way, to allow people to meet minds like yourself, and to develop our spectacular community. This has been a challenging year, clearly, for everyone. And it really became almost a year of a bridge for explorers. It was really neat to see traffic grow in such a pure place and for people to discover that there is a place where they can escape all the chaos of the world and just observe the natural world in its purest state. It really became a healing place for many, and I'm so humbled. I've always wanted it to have more, educational outreach and more with like elderly people and in hospitals. And that's always been a struggle, not because it's not available, but just because, believe it or not, schools and these places have a lot of bureaucratic systems. And in this COVID environment, it was kind of funny. I'll share a story with you. My daughter suddenly was stayed home schooling, and I walk in, she's on the computer, and there's a Dakura Eagle cam. I'm like, hey, that's my cam. That's our cam Explorer. She's like, yeah, we know. We're studying it for biology. So, it's really neat to see that proliferation. Of course, said you want Professor Charlie to speak? Like, no, it's okay. But it's really we don't need any help. I can help you with some of the questions. So I'm really happy to see it expand. There are a lot of locations out there that we'd like to do, but that again is what makes Katmai so truly unique. Is that it's truly a place where nature is working, and that's why it's so fun to have. I mean, right now we're going to transition to the polar bear cam and call it Arctic month, and the entire mood is going to change from a place of celebration where nature's working to a place of fear of issues like global warming, ice. Will the bears be fed? Are they starving? How that ecosystem works. So, I hope everyone will come over and join with us and learn there. Again, the COVID thing kind of humbled me. I'm just blessed again to be a steward of the public and to share this with as many people as possible and to keep it as neutral. I would love to hear from our audience about things that they would like. We have so many cams and we're always looking for new ones. Technology is changing so much that I'm sure we'll be able to add a lot of things that we didn't dream possible. But, that's just my job. I'm just a servant. I try to lay breadcrumbs for people. And I've kind of, I don't know, I find that success is like chasing your shadow. You're never there. So if you told me that we could raise $100,000 for Katmai in a week, I would have said no way. If you told me that we could have 500,000 votes on Bear Week, I'd say no way. But yet I know the next question is going to be what now? What next? So I just want to appreciate it and really celebrate it. And truly what I mean is that Explore is for the people. And, I'm just honored to share it with so many. We have no tricks up our sleeve and to showcase the work of yours. So if we can continue down that path and keep it simple, I'm going to call that success. Always open for feedback and notes, though. Like, for example, would people like more talks like this? I have no idea. Could we improve them? I didn't even know people, Candace and our staff said, Charlie, you should do one. And I was like, I didn't know if people wanted to hear me speak. So maybe these are things that are quite easy and we could keep the ball rolling through the year.
Definitely.
Never stop learning. I always say at Explore, we're Never Stop Learning meets Sesame Street for adults. We try to make people feel like they're two again, make learning fun. That's where I am. So I'm growing with everyone else, and we feed off people like you, Mike. So, we're always open for notes to how to improve. Great honor.
Well, thanks so much. It's been fun speaking with you today.
All right. And for everyone else, hope you're all preparing for winter and, celebrating Fat Bear Week and adding a few extra pounds yourself so we all can hibernate. And like I said, Explore is just a family, a home away from home, and please share with your friends, and you're always welcome here.